Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell, and in addition to podcasting, I'm a leadership coach, a mastermind facilitator, a best-selling author, and a speaker. I love taking these nonprofit leadership topics on the road or into your Zoom room. If you need someone at your next conference or workshop, check out my new speaking page at pattonmcdowell.com for more information. You're going to enjoy another fantastic conversation today with Robb Webb, who serves as the Director of Rural Church, one of 4 funding areas of the Duke Endowment, a multi-billion-dollar private foundation serving North and South Carolina. And of course, it's great to hear from someone like Robb, as many of you listening are seeking investment at your organization from funders wherever you are. And he's literally seen hundreds of applications for support. And of course, he's been very thoughtful in this conversation in sharing exactly what he's looking for. And of course, I'm impressed, as I know you will be, with the thoughtful evaluation that he and his team do. And it will translate into specific actions you can take to serve your organization better, particularly as it makes its case for support. And he talks specifically about 3 key areas. Number 1, financial strength. Number 2, articulating a clear community need. And then finally, what he calls distributed leadership. Now, you'll want to hear all 3 of these topics and much more as you listen to this conversation. Lots of reasons to check out the show notes for this episode. It's number 209. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com and you will find all of the resources Robb discussed, as well as more information on Robb and the great work he and his colleagues are doing at the Duke Endowment, which, by the way, is approaching its 100th anniversary of philanthropic investment in the Carolinas. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Robb Webb. Robb, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thank you, Patton. It's good to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, excited about this conversation, Robb. You and I have had many conversations about leadership and, of course, the philanthropic sector, which you have been a wonderful advocate for. And, of course, as part of the Duke Endowment, an investor, literally, in some of the great work going on here in the Carolinas in particular. A topic you and I have discussed, and one that I know our listeners are eager to hear, is, of course, some of the challenges facing them and what you as a funder are looking for as you evaluate organizations in which you invest. But let me go back to that challenge question. Given your interaction with many of these leaders, is there a single challenge that you think stands out in terms of what nonprofit leaders are dealing with?
Well, I think nonprofit leaders have their plates are very, very full. And if I had to narrow it to a single challenge, I would say that it is how to best allocate time. Understanding time as their most precious resource. And what I mean by that is that nonprofit leaders often have multiple full-time jobs. So there is the work that called them into the particular sector that they're in. There's fundraising, there's employee development, there's board development. There's just so much to do, reading, innovating, trying to keep abreast of what's going on, that figuring out how best to allocate the time, devote what chunk of it to which purpose, I think is a critical challenge. And that seems to be something that people are saying to us as we move out in the field.
Right.
One way to get more time is to hire more people, but that requires raising more money and then training them, so there are no easy answers here.
Yeah, well put. And I guess that manifests itself, Robb. I mean, do you see it literally in the exhaustion sometimes of the leaders in which you interact with, or they are unable to maybe fulfill some of the obligations they're trying to carry? But I guess what examples have you seen that kind of confirms that the challenge is time?
Yeah, I do think you hear people talking about stress levels being elevated. Probably the best people to talk to about that would be the nonprofit leaders' family members,
Right.
Because to the public, they certainly put on an incredible face. Most of the people I encounter have what feels like boundless energy. But when you finally stop and have a cup of coffee and be able and get a chance to talk to them, you find that they're being pulled in an awful lot of directions, and largely it's because they love what they do and the causes that they serve, and frankly, our communities are better for their work. So I think, we in philanthropy and we as a society have to figure out a way to help them as they seek to help communities that we all care about.
Yeah, well put. And again, applaud you for recognizing that. I think many that are listening right now perhaps think funders don't fully or really understand. And I know you're not claiming to understand everything they're dealing with, but it does seem like you are sensitive to their challenge. And maybe we'll unpack that further because I think one thing that has been noteworthy about the Duke Endowment, when you fund eligible organizations, I've heard that, frankly, you're not really aggressive in the accounting for that investment. In other words, you're not, as some funders create a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of reporting requirements. Now, I'm not saying you're not accountable, but is that perhaps in some ways influenced by you and your colleagues not wanting to add more burden to those grantees that you're investing in?
Well, I think we do want to know what's going on in grants. And so we do have progress reports and year-end reports, and in some cases bring in outside evaluators. So we want to know, but I think we've worked very hard internally as a team to align the questions we're asking on our application with the questions that will come later on the progress reports. And so there's a real integration there that may feel less onerous, but I do want to emphasize that there's a pretty big push for data and understanding data, but I think we try to do that in collaboration or partnership with the folks that are out there on the ground. For example, a little earlier today, I had a conversation with one of our beneficiaries to talk through some of these various issues. So I hope that what you find from our organization is a real desire by each of the program officers to want to have this conversation and find a way forward that gives us the information we need, and honestly gives the nonprofit leader the information that they need. I mean, they want to track progress against strategy too, and they want to know that they're making a difference. And so finding the space that works for both of us is really important to the endowment.
Yeah, well put. Well, good segue to the endowment. The Duke Endowment in particular is where you have been for a fair amount of time. And I wonder if, Rob, for our listeners who don't know, tell us, what is the Duke Endowment and what is your role there?
Well, the Duke Endowment is a private foundation formed December 11th, 1924. So we're about a year out from our 100th anniversary, our centennial, which we're all very excited about. Mr. Duke created the endowment to look after really 4 areas of interest: institutions of higher education, and he narrowed that to Duke University, Davidson College, Johnson C. Smith University, and Furman University. He also had an interest in healthcare, and so our healthcare program area works in North and South Carolina, largely with not-for-profit hospital systems, but not exclusively, and they're working on trying to innovate to get high quality healthcare into this state and to improve access. We have a child and family well-being program area that works in North and South Carolina on child welfare work, including trying to improve the entire child welfare system. And then the 4th area of interest that Mr. Duke had was rural United Methodist churches in North Carolina. And that's the program area that I directed. So we're slightly different than the other 3 program areas in that we're exclusive to North Carolina. The other 3 are in North and South Carolina. And we have a geographic emphasis on rural communities with a particular denominational emphasis on the United Methodist Church. And you might think that would limit us, but in fact, our number of of eligible churches is approaching 700, which gives us great coverage
Wow.
across the state of North Carolina, and it means that there's a church in nearly every community, and those churches are ready to do a whole lot of good, and we're happy to be a part of that with them.
No, it's fantastic, and I've seen up close some of the work that you are investing in across the state of North Carolina through the Rural Church. And of course, speaking for a lot of my fundraising colleagues, Rob, admittedly, we sometimes wonder what it would be like to be on the other side of the philanthropic table. And so I wonder if you could speak to your leadership journey. What did you do that led to the great work you're doing now? Talk about your career path.
I probably have a non-traditional path to this chair, but it worked. And so I began work doing management consulting, first for a regional firm and then for a large national or international Big Six accounting firm, and got interested in and worked in the healthcare side of that work, and at one time was doing a lot of work related to merger and acquisition. So some of the research that goes into due diligence before a sale. Simultaneously, I had a calling to be engaged in pastoral ministry, and was volunteering at my local church, the church I had more or less grown up in. I was active as a youth group volunteer, and sort of fighting this notion of going off to divinity school. I'll fast forward through 7 years of discernment, and I ended up at Duke Divinity School. Part of the degree, the Master of Divinity degree, requires experiential education. And my first placement was in a rural church in Eastern North Carolina, and I learned from that placement that it was the Duke Endowment that afforded me the ability to have this experiential education. And I got very, very curious about the endowment and started looking into it. My second year, I did another experiential education placement, this time in an urban setting. And I learned from those two that what really energized me about ministry was more on the administrative side. So pulling in those things that I had learned prior to going to divinity school. And so I was able to secure an internship for my third experiential education placement at the Duke Endowment as an intern.
Wow.
And got to see some of this work up front, and knew that it was a perfect blend of what I had learned in the management consulting world and what I was learning in the theological world. It came together in the rural church program area. And so I probably foolishly, but I after I finished my internship, I asked if I could apply for a job that had come open here. And after a series of very long interviews that took the better part of half a year, they decided to take a chance, and I started at the endowment in early 2006 after graduating from divinity school, and in 2010 became director. So probably not the way I would have drawn it out, folks.
Right.
But the thing I learned early on was Bobby Vaught, who was president of Davidson College, and one of his addresses to, one of the speeches he made to seniors, said, "Look, your first job is not going to be your last job. Learn something from every job that you have." And I was not at Davidson when President Vaught was president, but I had the chance to hear him say that on more than one occasion. And the reality is there's a great deal of truth in that. And so at each of these stations along the way, there was a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn technically about the work. There's a lot to learn about interpersonal relationships. There's a lot to learn about how to conduct a meeting. There's just tons of, there was,
Yes.
I felt like my entire career leading up to where I landed was an incredible learning opportunity that prepared me for this work. And I didn't stop learning the day I got here.
Exactly.
There was more learning to be done. I didn't know what it meant to be a grant maker. And to be honest, every day I try to get a little bit better at doing this. So I would say that taking every opportunity along the way to learn, even in the mundane things. I mean, even in the way in which you craft an agenda for a meeting, there is much to be gained from being intentional and taking time and being open to learning at all of those time points.
Yeah, it's impressive. And what a good takeaway, right? Already for our listeners thinking about their leadership path. And of course, we'll talk more about yours and what has kind of fueled your lifelong learning objectives, which I know continue. Go ahead and dispel this myth, because I already know this is wrong. But for someone thinking, gosh, Rob, it must be just kind of fun to give away money. But there's a whole lot of rigor to what you do. And I wonder if you could, I'm sure you enjoy and appreciate the investment you're able to make, but it's not easy either, is it?
Well, it's an honor and privilege to be able to do this work, to be invited into Mr. Duke's vision for the Carolinas. And I come at this two ways. One, I say, I've long thought it is easy to give away money. It's harder to give it away well.
Yeah,
and I think what most philanthropies are trying to do is give it away well. And that requires that you think through a series of questions what is it that you want to see that's different, and develop a theory of change, develop an evidence roadmap about that relates to that theory of change, think about what those measurement tools are going to be. And through all of this is not something that can be done independently and in our offices. This has to be done with a dance that is both where you're reviewing data, but you're also out in community talking to people, that you're having listening sessions. As we thought about our strategy, we made a strategy refresh in 2016, and I'll be the first to tell you we had to do this refresh in 2016 because my first stab at the strategy did not work. It failed. And so there was this sort of constant checking in on how we were doing, and we weren't doing well. So in 2016, we began to rethink what strategy might look like. And in doing that, pulled together at least 4 different groups, listening session groups of people to weigh in on what we were thinking. And our strategy changed based on what we learned. So, you cannot do this work by decree, or you can't do it well by decree. And it is in the making of the strategy and then executing of that strategy where things do get difficult. And, sometimes we have to admit that we fail, and there's learning in that too. And so that's what I think one of the hallmarks of what the leadership here at the endowment has been over the last really 20 years, but certainly in more with a great deal of emphasis in the last 7 to 10 is on continual learning, not being afraid to admit mistakes, putting all that out for your peers to help you wrestle with, and then put your learning out more broadly to all nonprofits and foundations to learn from.
I love your phrase of, it's easy to give away money, but not necessarily easy to do it well. And again, that's an ongoing, I guess, challenge in a good way that you're investing and engaging. And in fact, I want to leverage your term, the dance. And again, this episode, I know for listeners, they're like, all right, what can I learn from Robb? Whether I'm eligible for Duke Endowment funding or not, what can I learn from a funder like what, Robb, you represent that will help me maybe sharpen my, appeal for investment? And I think you lifted up 3 areas that I'd like to unpack with you that, as you generally consider a potential grantee or beneficiary, there are 3 things you're looking for. And the first one you mentioned to me earlier was financial strength. So talk about what that is and how you evaluate it.
I will, and I promise you I'm going to come to that. I want to say one thing first. And to those that are thinking about making application to various foundations, I want to lead by saying foundations have strategy too. And so they have mission statements or aim statements. They have approaches, that is the lenses through which they see the world. They have strategies. And so I think it's really important to familiarize, for nonprofits to familiarize themselves with the foundations in which they hope to apply, to make sure that what it is that they're doing is in alignment with the foundation that they're trying to apply.
Great point.
I just think that's critical. It doesn't, and if it's not, it doesn't mean that your work isn't important or valued or necessary. It just means that the fit might not be there at a particular foundation. So understanding that, I think, is really important. And then in making an application, I have lifted up financial strength as an important piece, and that may sound counterintuitive, but it comes from this place that I think too often folks seem to want, applicants want to indicate that without a grant that they couldn't possibly do their work. So maybe that the thought is that it makes it makes the grant rise in the philanthropy's decision process. And the reality is that what we want to see is that you have other people investing in you as well. That one, you've thought about that, but two, you've got buy-in from other funders, your board, but some way of demonstrating that there is financial strength, that you're out in your community, and they're contributing to what it is that you want to do. So part of this is when you look at a budget, you get a real sense, or you can get a real sense of what's most important in an organization. There's a joke that preachers say at stewardship season, and that is, show me your checkbook and I'll show you your priorities.
Right.
And they're hoping, that the church is prominent in people's checkbook.
Somewhere, yes.
Somewhere. Similarly with a budget, I mean, when you look at a budget, either for an organization or a particular program, you can begin to see, or you begin to question, does the budget align with the outcomes that the application purports to want to achieve? And that too is a demonstration of financial strength. Have you aligned what it is that you're going to spend with what it is that you say that you're going to do? So it's not just about contributions, although that's important. It's also about alignment with the goal of the application, and making sure budget and outcomes are in alignment.
Several points I want to underline there. One, it sounds like, Rob, desperation is not necessarily a good tactic. If some think, well, gosh, if I'm the most desperate, or I have this urgent need, that perhaps you'll move me up on the list. And you're saying, well, not exactly, because you want to see, I guess, diverse revenue streams. Is that a characteristic to look for?
Yes, and I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, when I first got into this role, a lot of the applications I read, that we're the poorest county in North Carolina, and, we'd have several dozen applications. So
right.
from every single, at one point we had applications from something like 60 out of 100 counties in North Carolina, and 60 counties can't be the poorest.
Right.
But there is something to that claim. There is some deficit somewhere that the nonprofit is trying to address, and you want them to just be clear and get at what is the specific one. So I think to say that, either you have no money or the communities or don't either, is to sell them short, and to sell yourself short, and to not necessarily engender strength and from the philanthropy of which you're applying.
Yeah, again, well put. Let me toss another concept at you that I know you're familiar with, the kind of the overhead metrics, or some would say the starvation models, that we need to show you, the funder, that, the great majority of our budget goes to program. However, we might be starving our staff or other operational investments. But is that something you look at? I mean, I know you want to see the money go to where the investment's needed, but how do you weigh in, I guess, on that kind of concept of the tug of war there?
It's a great question. I mean, I've asked to see the budget the way the budget should be. So show me what the program is going to cost, what are its true costs, and what part of those are personnel. And I really do believe that a lot of my colleagues here at the endowment feel the same way. We can't make a good decision without good information, and so we want to see what does the program truly cost, and that includes the rental space, human beings, all of the inputs that go into producing a high quality program. And I think in all of this, what we're after mainly is what's going to be different as a result of the application. So as we're looking at the budget, we're also reading this through the lens of what are the outcomes that you say that you're going to achieve, and what's the impact that's going to leave behind. So what are your long-term outcomes, and how do you get there? And the budget should be a roadmap for how you would achieve that long-term outcome. So we're never really very far from the outcome.
Yeah, it's well put. And so it's okay. In other words, I guess I'm translating what you said, that if investment in personnel, investment in anything is necessary to achieve that long-term outcome, you're okay with that. There's not some arbitrary, like 90% of my budget has to go to programming or some such line. You're okay with me trying to articulate the best model for us to do this, and whatever that is.
That's right. And realize that we're going to have a conversation about it. I mean,
right.
It doesn't, just because it's on the page doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get, that's going to be the end story. We need to have a conversation about it, but we can't have that conversation if we don't know all the information. So I mean, for me, I just feel like putting it all out there gives us a starting point with which to begin to have some detailed planning type conversations on what progress might look like, and what outcomes we could actually achieve, and where we're aspirational and where we're not. I mean, all of that gets rolled together. But if the budget's off, or if the budget's kind of wonky, it's going to be harder to get at those kinds of conversations.
Well, point. And speaking of a conversation, I know you're particularly focused on in any beneficiary, potential beneficiary, is what you describe as community need as a question. So talk about that. So you're looking to assure, I guess, the organization is meeting a defined need, or what do you mean by that?
What we're mainly mean by that is that we're looking to make sure that the community has been part of the planning process that has become the grant. So what we don't want to see is if a nonprofit decides for the community it serves that it needs a particular intervention.
Interesting.
Rather, it's better that the community is planning with the nonprofit on what an intervention that would be best used or would best benefit, I should say, the community. So one of the things that we've learned about churches that thrive, for example, or faith-based nonprofits that thrive, is that they create new networks. And part of this, what that means is, or what we've learned is that these are folks that are going out, the church is talking to the superintendent of schools and the principals of schools and teachers. They're talking to the sheriff. They're talking to county commissioners. They're talking to this wide array of people in the community. And as you have those conversations, then what comes back are the challenges.
Yes.
And then together, those groups, the school system and the church and nonprofits, can work together on what the challenges might, or what interventions that could address the challenges might look like. And then through a planning process and doing their work together, come up with a proposal that's going to be stronger. It's stronger because it's going to have a diversity of voices. It's going to have, from the very beginning, buy-in from the community to do the things that the community wants to do. So that's what we're talking about. I mean, there is a sort of a need-based approach where applicants might want to talk about great need, and then they've come up with a solution and that's admirable. Where it leaves a gap is we're not entirely certain that the community has been involved in that assessment of the need. So I think a more comprehensive approach, one that moves out from the nonprofit and invites people in, goes to where the people are, and engages them, then then helps create I don't want to say solution, because that's
too easy,
too much, but
right.
creates a pathway that seeks to reshape the challenge and have the kinds of outcomes that everyone would be proud of.
Yeah, I love the balance you bring to that kind of, again, thinking like a nonprofit leader who's seeking funding. I guess you want some facts. In other words, if my county is underserved, or there are individuals that are underserved, and we have these statistical issues we're facing, but you also want to hear that I went out and talked to people, and instead of we decided the solution, right? You'd like to know the facts, but also be assured that we're having a community dialogue about it.
Yeah, that's well said. So Jason Gray, he's used to be at the North Carolina Rural Economic Development Center, the NC Rural Center. He's retired now. Jason had a great, short, easy phrase for this, which was data is the beginning of the story. So you need the data. You need to understand. You need to have a sense of what's happening in the community. But there's so much behind that data that you've got to go out and talk to people to figure out what it is, or what's really there, and then how you might address what's really there. So I think it's always a balance. There's data, and then you've got to go out, and that becomes the beginning of the story, and you've got to go out and have hear the rest of the story from the people represented by that data, and then together create the plan that fills a particular gap that's been revealed both in data and story.
Rob, I think I recall that you also do kind of some anecdotal research when you go out into the field and do site visits. Do you not kind of pose questions or talk about that, how you might determine whether this organization fits a community need?
Oh, well, all right. So now I'm forced to reveal my deep dark secrets of
You don't have to name the county. You don't have to name the county.
But I have this practice where when I go on a site visit, I'll often stop short of the visit and go into a gas station, corner store, some sort of establishment that's in the community, and I'll ask for directions to the nonprofit or church. And if people who are within eyesight of the church can't give you directions to it, or the nonprofit, then you've probably got a slight problem with movement out into the community. It's not a perfect system, but it's a fairly
it's telling though, isn't it?
It's a telling one, and it's one that has fared fairly well for me. I've been at the endowment 17 years at this point, so it's been a good proxy, and it then leads to a series of questions, and it's important to say that it leads to a series of questions. So those encounters then help me as I move into the site visit to ask questions about how embedded in the community people are.
Well, thank you. I didn't mean for you to reveal your deep secrets, but I think it's fascinating, and I think quite honestly, for a leader listening, to ponder that rhetorically, like, all right, does my community really understand who I am and what I'm doing? And I bet some of us might say, yeah, we may are isolated, and we aren't telling the story enough so that the local grocer down the road could, in fact, direct someone to us and even articulate what we do.
Yeah, and that goes back to the opening about time, like how much you have to figure out what time, how to allocate your time as a nonprofit leader, and what's most important. I do think understanding the community is critical to it, and then communicating back. And I'll just lift up that strong communication is another one of the attributes that we've learned from studying rural churches since about 2008 that demonstrate strength. So they're communicating what they do internally to the membership and externally to the community, and in that communication, they're also leaving a channel open to receive communication. So yep. I think that's critical for long-term, not just surviving, but thriving in a community.
Yeah, well put. Recapping the first two, financial strength. Second one, community need, and all the different areas you kind of elaborated there. the third area, Robb, you've mentioned, which of course fits perfectly in a podcast about leadership. You talk about distributed leadership is something you're looking for. So what does that mean, and what exactly are you kind of trying to figure out there?
Well, with that one, what we've learned over time is that those places that thrive do two things really well, in addition to what I've already named. The creating new networks is one, communicating is another. Two more that kind of fit in this piece is that they create a learning culture and they foster leadership. And so what do we mean by create a learning culture? So creating a learning culture means that people are willing to test and fail. If it fails, the failure is not in something not going well, it's in not learning from it. So constantly being able to learn. That means that leaders have to give the folks in their on their staff quite a bit of freedom,
Right.
and trust them enough with a set of projects. And it also means that folks conducting those projects need to be paying attention to what's working, what's not, and why. So then the second piece is fostering leadership. So that paying attention to what's working and what's not, surrounding those folks is a way to foster leadership. So it's inviting people in, not calling on the same group or same person to do the same work all the time, but trying to spread the leadership around so that people have different opportunities to demonstrate where they have strength. And I think that's the other part about this is like in a distributed leader kind of network, you understand who has strength in a particular topic and allow them to work in that particular topic and bring their strength, so that the whole gets better. So I think a top-down organizations, you have to have some structure, of course, but if everything runs through the leader and or through the executive director, I should say, and there's no real model for fostering leadership or creating a way for staff members to learn, then I do worry that one, the leader burns out, and two, you leave an awful lot of talent on the table with people who have a great deal of gifts that want to use them for the work and want to use them in creating the outcome.
Yeah, well put. And I guess it leads to a follow-up in terms of, I've heard funders talk about literally evaluating the executive director. In other words, does he or she have adequate skills and experience for us to invest in? But it sounds like you're looking at the senior leader, but you're also looking at the team talent, or do you even get that granular, I guess, in your staff analysis?
Well, relationships matter. That's what you hear that across pretty much every sector and every field. And so I think as we do this work, we are, looking at the executive director, but you're also looking at the program staff and seeing who's doing what and what relationships you've had with them over a period of time. Have they done other projects and other work that you can reference, or at least ask about it? So I do think there is. I don't want to oversell. I don't want to suggest that there's this deep sort of HR dive into
Right.
but there is, as it relates to the project, I think a desire to want to understand who's doing what and what expertise they bring to that particular project and experience, and then how they're learning and applying what they've learned.
Yeah, well put. And again, that's something, I think as our listeners ponder these ideas and these concepts, they can think about how they would articulate to a funder like you. Here is how my leadership model works. Here's how we're doing, and assuring that we have the right folks in the right place and all that. I guess similar question, Robb, about my board. I'm a nonprofit leader. What are you as a funder looking at? You hear things like, well, we're going to check and make sure 100% of the board is making contributions philanthropically, but are there characteristics like that you look at in terms of board leadership?
Well, I do think that's an important one. I mean, you want your board to buy into the project that you're doing, and one way to buy in addition to their time, is to make a financial contribution. So I do think that's important. I think, you look at boards, you try to get a sense of a diverse set of thought, male and female, and across race and gender and geography, across and also across expertise. So I think when you're looking at board members, that these are all the kinds of things that you're trying to discern. And I think it's okay to ask folks questions about that. So it's not just the money piece, although that's an important piece. I think it's kind of a broad glimpse at what that body is bringing to the organization.
Yeah, again, well put. And I guess final question in this leadership category. It seems to me turnover is a significant factor in many of the organizations, and perhaps harkens back to your opening statement about, the time pressure and perhaps even the burnout. So are you seeing that? And how does that affect you as a funder when an organization has turnover, in many ways, I guess, damaging their ability to move forward? How do you even address that, if at all?
Well, I think what we're seeing, we've seen some shuffling of folks moving from one nonprofit to another, but within a similar sector. I think the thing that we've got our eye on, for me, is transition planning. There are executive directors that have been at the helm for a really long time, and have great expertise and a tremendous amount of experience, and so they're moving into a window of their leadership experience where they may be moving toward retirement, and so trying to understand what the transition plan is pretty important.
Is that a question you pose? Literally, is that part of your process? Okay.
Yes, in some places it is. Sometimes the work it's too important to not ask that question, and while that may seem intrusive or maybe not none of our business, the reality is that if you start something that's 3, 4, 5 years or more, and you start it with one leader, and the leader that comes behind them, it's not a priority, then it can be whiplash in a community to uproot a particular program or not invest the time that's necessary to make sure that it reaches its outcome and has the impact that you hope for. So we do ask those questions, and I think they're important questions, and I think you want to make sure that the organization has wants to follow the direction of a particular program. Now, again, board members can help shape some of that, as can staff, but that's why you raise the question, to figure out sort of where these questions reside.
Final question in this category. Again, if I'm eligible for your funding, are there any of the key characteristics you're looking for? Again, these 3 certainly seem to me to be hallmarks and would help me get ready if I can demonstrate financial strength, that I indeed am meeting a community need, and my leadership is distributed in an appropriate manner. Is there anything else that kind of the nuances of what you look for when you're?
I might add one more, and that as you're looking at the community piece, and you've done that work together, you're seeing the assets that the community is bringing, and you're building on those, and so, which means then you really do kind of understand what's going on in the places in which you seek to serve.
I see. Collaborative nature, maybe, or what?
Collaborative nature, but even a little more than that, in that you're recognizing what the community brings to the table that can be important for this project. That could be a building, it could be a playground, it could be a park, it could be probably is a lot of really smart people with a great deal of experience in the region, and which could translate into a huge volunteer base, for example. So I just think being able to see that and name it, and know how the community wants to be engaged is a fourth kind of important piece.
Love that. Again, bonus topic, bonus advice here. So there are 4 areas that I think a listener could contemplate as they evaluate their potential seeking of funding of all kinds, certainly from a foundation like yours. One more leadership question for you and your team, and I believe leadership at the endowment more broadly, you utilize, is it Daniel Pink's model that you all have used? And I wonder if you could describe that maybe briefly, and what is that, and how has that helped shape the work that you all do as a team?
We do use Pink for. I've relied on some of his work for a number of things. His notion that you want to create meaning and purpose for your employees, and also give them some sense of work autonomy. Those are ideas that he's lifted up that's really important. The one that we really kind of focus in, though, on, at least in our department and operationalize, is this notion of how you can how you develop people. So we think of it as this 70-20-10 plan. So 70% of your leadership development happens on the job. So looking for opportunities for folks within the department to move on to a committee here, or lead a project, or shadow someone on a site visit, or some sort of on the job piece. So that's 70%. 20% are in developmental relationships. So this could be working in cross-program teams, getting to know the work of another program area a little bit better, getting out to meet some of in our case, the clergy and laity that we work with. So that's the 20. And then 10% is in the formal learning piece. So this might be a conference or a class or certificate. So we think about, when we shape our development plans for the year, we think in that 70-20-10 modality, where 70% is coming from on the job, 20% is in developmental relationships, and 10% is formal. And together as a team, figure out where the opportunities for each of those components lie, and then check in with one another quarterly to make sure that we're on track to hit those targets. I think it's a really good framework. I mean, and so much of what we learn really is on the job. So being intentional about that has been important.
I guess obviously you answered the question. Maybe has it helped you as you kind of consider your own kind of leadership journey? Is it something that also allows you to look ahead 1, 3, 5, even 10 years from now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of what we're trying to do at the endowment moves across the 4 program areas. So what's happening in healthcare touches church, and what's happening with child and family well-being touches church, and higher education is undergirds a lot of what we're doing. So I think, like, for example, in the 20%, the developing developmental relationships, I think that's been really important in my growth. Also working on internal teams. So we have a number of teams that have a shelf life. They have to create a particular product, answer a particular question, and once that's done, then they kind of move off into the world. So one, for example, is around disaster relief. We have a lot of hurricanes in North Carolina. So what does it look like to work on a committee from across grant making areas, and bring a framework of a plan to our trustees for them to vote on and take a look at. So I do think that's important. And I feel like as a enterprise, we're looking for those opportunities at all 3 levels. We're looking for those on the job opportunities, as well as formal opportunities as well. So we do go out to conferences too, and people are doing under the formal piece, and people are doing certificate programs, among other things. So I want to make sure that we are pretty robust across all 3, and I do feel like it's helped.
I love that. And again, as this entire conversation, you provided a lot of great takeaways in terms of individual leadership, like the one you just shared, how you personally can divide your professional development time and energy, how you can help your team do the same. And of course, Rob, thank you for all of the insight and from the funder perspective. So fundraising obviously is critical to every nonprofit leader listening. So using this framework and particularly the three and maybe the fourth framing devices is very valuable. Final question. Is there anything else as you ponder advice you might offer? Because I know you run into a lot of people who are like, hey, Rob, I'm thinking about getting into nonprofit work or nonprofit leadership. Any advice you offer when you run into that kind of conversation?
Well, on that particular question, the first thing I ask is who else is doing the work you are thinking about doing?
Yeah, good point.
And I think it's important to take a look at Candid, which is a tool or an organization that creates a tool that allows you to look at a number of nonprofits across sectors. So see who's out there doing that work, talk to those folks, be engaged and doing some homework before launching a nonprofit. There's a whole lot of nonprofits out there, and they're doing most of them are doing really great work, but you certainly don't want to reinvent the wheel. So maybe instead of launching one, there's an opportunity to go and work with one, or maybe start by volunteering. The other piece I would say is think about strategy. As you think about your nonprofit and what it is that you want to do, start with the end in mind. What changes, and that is our definition of an outcome, some sort of behavioral change, some sort of change. And output is all the stuff you have to do to make that happen. That we met
right
times, we did courses, we did this sort of thing, but that drive to the outcome. And then if you're kind of in the work and thinking about in nonprofit work and thinking about taking on something else, one thing that helped us, they didn't originate from the endowment, but we had an outside consultant come in and kind of help us as we thought about our strategy, and sort of framed some of that discussion around 4 questions. What are we not doing well enough? What are we doing well but not enough of? What is getting in the way? And what are some new things that we can try? And so if you're already in the nonprofit world and you're thinking about taking on some new work, which is the other side of that question, I would encourage you to sit down and put some of these ideas on paper. A really famous theologian wrote one time that he writes in order to because he has something to say, and thus having something to say, what he meant by the writing piece is that he wants to be clear about it, and putting things on paper offers that clarity. And you want to make sure that the thing that you have to say really is the thing that you want to do. And so I think working through some of these questions, or all of those questions, can help you in that endeavor.
Fantastic. And indeed, those 4 questions, that is the making of a great staff retreat, a board retreat, or some sort of session, right? That would force you to reflect and evaluate on the nature of your organization and what questions need to be answered. So once again, Rob, grateful for all of the feedback and takeaways that this episode will provide our listeners. As you know, I'll ask one final parting gift, a book that's been meaningful to you that you might recommend for our listeners.
Well, one that I would lift up, one that has been meaningful for me is, and then I go back to, is called The Opposable Mind, and it's by Roger Martin, written in 2007. So it's not new, but I think it's had staying power, and it really speaks to integrative thinking and what it looks like to hold a whole lot of things in tension, that are in tension, and try to move through them in a way that's positive and and generative. And that's our real life. That's life. Like it's not always easy and cut and dried. And so what Martin gets at, using business cases in The Opposable Mind, is how to do the work more efficiently, and to give you a framework and techniques for dealing with some difficult questions.
Excellent. Delighted to add that to our expanding reading list, and that is one I'm delighted to do just that. So, Robb, once again, thank you. Where can people go to find out more about you and the great work you're doing at the endowment?
The best place to find us is on our website, which is dukeendowment.org, and there you'll find a wonderful history of Mr. Duke and all of his giving to North and South Carolina, and you can drill down to each of our 4 program areas. And please do stop on the Rural Church landing page and read more about our strategy and what we're trying to accomplish.
Indeed. I'm delighted to lift that up, and we'll encourage our listeners to check out the show notes so they can take advantage of all these resources. Once again, Robb, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's been great to journey with you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Robb as much as I did and came away with some practical ways to better make the case for the good work you're doing at your nonprofit organization, and take to heart the advice Robb offers around financial strength, community need, and distributed leadership. Don't forget about the show notes. They are available on our website, pattonmcdowell.com. You can find out more about Robb and the great work the Duke Endowment is doing across each of their 4 funding areas. As always, please share this episode with someone else on the path. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com and you'll see the follow button, which will allow you to listen to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. They come out every Thursday. And if you like this one, click on the episodes button at the top of that same page, and you can scroll through thumbnails of some of our most popular episodes or search by topic or guest name. Thanks for all you're doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now, and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time on The Path.